we're really going to encourage everyone who can vote by mail to do that. We can't put off an election because of a pandemic, but we can take the appropriate steps to keep people safe so that they can exercise their right.
With the CDC's director warning of a second wave in the fall, there's mounting pressure to limit unnecessary interaction, including in-person voting in November. And here's why. Nearly 3 weeks ago, Wisconsin held its controversial primary election during a stay-at-home order, but Republicans forced Democratic voters to make a choice: exercise your rights in a pandemic or don't vote at all. In the end, more than 400,000 people voted. This is Wisconsin Republican lawmaker Robin Vos. He told voters it was safe for them to vote in person while he wore this. Now health officials have confirmed, with only 30% of the data in, that 19 people who either voted or worked in the polls have tested positive for the virus. This should be a lesson. If we want to guarantee safe and fair elections, we have to switch to mail-in ballots. The latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll found 67% of voters in total support the idea of mail-in voting for November. So why is that something that most Republican lawmakers won't support? Well, some Republicans, including Trump, claim that there is an increased risk of voter fraud by using a mail-in system.
Mail ballots. Now, mail ballots, they cheat, okay? People cheat. Mail ballots are a very dangerous thing for this country because they're cheaters. They go and collect them. They're fraudulent in many cases.
But with 57.2 million Americans voting by mail in 2016, Trump's voter fraud investigative committee could not produce any evidence to support what he said. Joining me now is the director of the democracy program at the Brennan Center for Justice, Wendy Weiser, also the executive director of the Advancement Project at National Office, Judith Browne Dianis. Thank you for both of you for joining us this morning. Wendy, let me just start with you. People cheat, people cheat, people cheat. That has been the mantra of President Trump since he got into office, and it doesn't really matter what you propose. That's his answer, that our democracy and our voting is fraught with dead people voting twice, people voting in multiple states. With respect to mail-in voting, is there some greater susceptibility to cheating in it?
Look, Americans need to know that mail-in voting is secure. This is simply an effort to sow doubt about the legitimacy of a form of voting that is already deeply embedded in the American election system, as you noted. 1 in 4 Americans cast ballots by mail in the last 2 federal elections. And exhaustive investigations have found that, like in-person voting, it is more likely that an American is going to be struck by lightning than commit mail voting fraud. And that's because election officials have multiple security tools in place to ensure the security of mail ballots and protect the integrity of the election. And voters can also take steps to ensure the safety of their ballots.
Judith, one of the things that President Trump said very recently, generally speaking, about expanding voting rights, right? The goal, I guess, it should be in a democracy to get 100% of people to vote. And we don't have that in the United States for various reasons. Some of it is people who just don't vote, and some of it is people who find it very difficult to vote because of the impediments that we've placed in their way. President Trump said very obviously the other day that if we let voting become easier to do, Republicans will never get elected again. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, he's showing his hand. Basically, his pushback on the idea of having vote by mail is that he's worried that the Republicans will lose. And instead, what he's doing is he's spreading this misinformation campaign, as usual, talking about voter fraud. But that's not what it's about. It's that he is worried that they will lose the election. They have a playbook. The GOP has a playbook to make it harder to vote for Americans because they know that they might actually lose these elections. So, at the end of the day, no one should have to put their health at risk in order to vote. For Black folks, we know that we have lost our lives for the right to vote and that we shouldn't have to do that again.
Wendy, it's a real issue here because we, right now, sitting in April, we're kind of hoping that by November, this is going to be something that we're looking at in the rearview mirror. But it's quite possible. Scientists are telling us it may not be. We're not sure even when they lift all these orders whether people will go to crowded places like shopping malls or movie theaters or casinos or places like that. And voting, where everybody touches the same machine and stands in a line next to each other, is one of those places that people could psychologically think is hazardous to their health come November. But I would imagine that in April, we have to be having this discussion, not just the three of us, but at a very high level to say, how do we preserve this election come November? What we can't afford is an election where, the 20% of people come out to vote because they're the only ones who feel safe about it.
Absolutely. And there are steps that we need to be taking now to actually run a credible and safe and fair election in November. We are actually running out of time to put in place the infrastructure we need to be able to handle the sheer volume of mail ballots that are going to be requested and cast by Americans this November, and to make sure that there are also, and this is also critical, safe and healthy polling sites for those Americans who cannot vote by mail or who experience a problem with their mail ballots. And in much of the country, we are not set up, the infrastructure is not there to be able to accomplish this without significant meltdowns like we saw in Wisconsin. And keep in mind, that was only about half the turnout or even less than we're expecting this November. So those problems are going to be magnified. So what we really need is an infusion of resources for state and local election officials. They actually know what needs to be done in order to ramp up and to change their infrastructure to run the election that we need to run this November. They just don't have the resources to do so. They need about $4 billion to be able to get the equipment, the infrastructure, the procedures in place to even be able to just print the ballots and put postage on the application envelopes. They don't have those resources right now. And this is something that the federal government needs to step up and put in the next stimulus package. It is only a small fraction, 0.2% of the $2 trillion that was in the last stimulus. And it is a small investment that is needed to protect the health of our democracy and the American people. Otherwise, we can see significant meltdowns this November.
Yeah, this is not actually a money problem. Of all the things that we have to solve these days, getting to people to vote by mail is not one that we have to think about as money being an impediment. Thanks to both of you. Wendy Weisel is the director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Judith Browne Dianis is the executive director of the Advancement Project National Office. Thanks to both of you.